from the Hawaii Visitors and Convention Bureau. Thank you so much for being here, Jay.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting us.
So I want to start with some numbers, and we're going to get into some of the work you're doing with communities on the ground, making sure that, as we alluded to in the open there, that tourism is a two-way street where everyone is benefiting, both the visitors and, of course, the communities that host them. But before we get to that, let's talk about the numbers that you're seeing, because, of course, we're all interested in the data here. How are we doing when it comes to tourism?
Well, tourism's being challenged right now, with the strength of the U.S. dollar against foreign currencies, with people feeling more comfortable flying internationally. I just came back from New York. I was the only one on the plane with a mask. So people are exhibiting travel behavior that's different than it was 2 years ago, for sure. And they're going overseas, and that's a challenge for us. And then with the strength of the dollar, it's a bargain for them to go overseas. So we're working as hard as we can. The Tourism Authority, Hawaii Tourism Authority, and their new leadership is working well with the legislature, which helps us and gets us funding for the long term. So we're looking at the numbers, and they're challenging.
Yeah.
Maui's numbers are down significantly through the end of this year. Statewide, we're at probably 2% to 7% down every month through the end of the year. So there's a challenge here for sure.
Now, do you attribute that to the factors that you're talking about, the strength of, the dollar versus the yen? Everybody I know is going to Japan, right?
It's true.
But do you attribute it to that, or is this impact from the wildfires themselves?
I think it's a combination, for sure. I think we saw softness coming just before the wildfires in Maui, so starting in June last year. And then, of course, the wildfires and the horrific impact they had on the people of Maui made the news across the country. And we were asking people to be mindful, to be respectful, and to wait for the right time to come back. And now we have to be out there with our messaging, ensuring that they hear it's time to come back. And so we're at that point right now.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. Mufi Hanneman has been on this program before talking about this sort of welcoming back messaging that they are starting to work on. We know that he is now going to be the head of the Hawaii Tourism Authority. So we're interested to know what does that message look like, and how do you make that so that the people who are on the ground in Maui, some folks who are still not housed, how we're sensitive to their needs while at the same time trying to make sure that the economy is shorn up so that they can have a job and that things can continue?
Sure, it's a challenge. Back in October last year, the Hawaii Tourism Authority provided us with $2.6 million in funds to help support the recovery of Maui, the economic recovery. And it was clear at that point we couldn't tell the story, we couldn't talk. So we worked with people on Maui, from Maui, and gave them a platform to raise their voices, to talk to people across the continent about what they were going through, and then that they were welcoming visitors back to allow them to continue to work, to earn a living, and to stay on Maui. And so that led right into what HTA Chair of the Board, Mauis Hanneman, is doing now, and has brought in from HLTA, the Makakau campaign, which really shows people on Maui, again, talking about how they're ready to host visitors. And so we're now transitioning our overall campaign, which still carries the value of Malama to take care of the place, but also with a little bit more welcoming to visitors.
And tell me a little bit about, this idea of sustainable tourism, regenerative tourism. Let's look at the numbers. In 2019, we had about 10 million visitors come to the state of Hawaii, which I think a lot of folks kind of bristle at. We felt like that might have been a little too much. Right. And then we went through COVID, where we experienced what it was like to have nobody, which, from an economic standpoint was devastating. But for a lot of folks, it felt like we finally had a little breathing room.
Yeah, it was gorgeous that way.
It was,
yeah.
The beaches were ours once again. What do you think is the right balance? Is there a number that you think that we should strive for as a state that is appropriate so that we don't feel so sort of, put on?
Yeah, absolutely. And the number is tough, because if someone comes and stays 2 days versus staying 12 days, the absolute number of visitors probably isn't the right measure. So the average visitor count or visitor census is probably more accurate to look at. And the way we can manage that is really by looking at how many beds we have for visitors. And so the counties are now looking, with the governor's support, at home rentals and the role they can play for the visitors and for the residents, and getting that back in balance that works best for the residents. So that's important. Back before 2019, when we got to 10.4 million visitors, about 10 years before that, we were at 7.2. none of that growth came from additional hotel guests. It all came from home rentals, a lot of them that were not permitted to be home rentals. And that allowed visitors to go into neighborhoods to really affect the residents' quality of life. So I think with the counties coming together with the governor to manage that kind of loophole, we're now back to a bed count, I think, that allows us to have a visitor plant that we can manage, and then we can have better quality of life for residents.
You know, I think you're really keying into something that when the governor comes on this program, he talks about a lot, and the mayor as well, just that this feeling of tourists being not in the tourism zones, and that the tourism districts are created for a reason. Not that we don't necessarily want to share the beauty of the entire state with people who come here, but that having what you didn't sign up for, a hotel as your neighbor, doesn't really sit right. What do you think, you know, if this enforcement is successful, what the state is talking about, what the counties are talking about, how do you think that will change the residents' experience of tourists in our community?
I think it'll be much more positive. You know, you'll see visitors, hopefully, doing positive things in the community through their Malama actions, but you also won't see them having a party next door Wednesday night. And I think that's the real rub. The absolute number, of course, is a factor as well. So we need to look at kind of zoning, permitting. You know, it's an issue that goes to the Hawaii Tourism Authority and beyond, because there's a whole infrastructure need, a whole vision, a whole zoning and planning process that can manage tourism, but also do it in a way that first and foremost benefits residents.
You know, when we have these conversations about tourism and about marketing Hawaii specifically, a lot of folks say we don't need to advertise Hawaii. Hawaii sort of sells itself. What do you think is the argument for messaging and for attracting a specific type of visitor? Why is that tax dollars well spent?
Sure. There was just a study done on the return that was covered in the paper, so I won't go into those details, but it's extremely positive return just economically. I think also if you look at other large brands, Coca-Cola, they've got a great share, but they continue to advertise because they know they've got competition. We've got incredible competition, so we know we need to be top of mind. But more so, I think we need to invite visitors that we're going to be happy hosting. And so if we can target in and focus on those who exhibit mindful behavior in their daily lives, who care about the environment, who care about the culture of the places they visit and want to help perpetuate them, if we can get a higher and higher share of those as guests in our homes, then I think we've got to win. And so the marketing dollars aren't to invite anyone and everyone, but to invite the mindful traveler.
And how do we key in on that mindful traveler? Where are they? How do we find them?
There's a lot of data out there, and our agencies are very smart, and so we're able to look at the data, and we've identified people who exhibit those behaviors in their daily lives and when they travel. And now we're able to look at 26 million people around the continent and target in on them and develop messaging that catches their attention and positions Hawaii in a way that makes it attractive to them. I think the people who say everyone knows Hawaii are correct. As soon as you say Hawaii to someone, they have an image that comes to mind. But is it the image we want to perpetuate? And so that's what we're trying to do with this audience.